By the early 1990s, the Misfits had become a legendary, almost mythical band whose legacy and music were kept under control by its founder, Glenn Danzig. And the Misfits remained an underground cult phenomenon throughout the mid to late 1980s. But between 1992 and 1994, a legal back and forth between former Misfits members and Glenn Danzig resulted in a settlement in favor of original bassist Jerry Only, his brother and Misfits guitarist Doyle, and other former members featured on early recordings. The agreement stipulated that each of the members had rights over the Misfits trademark and would be required to divvy up the royalties from album sales. But most importantly for this story, the agreement gave Jerry Only and others exclusive rights over using and performing under the name The Misfits. And so in 1995, the Misfits were recreated with a new frontman, Michale Graves, and a new era began, where the Misfits would rise up from their underground coffin into the mainstream and become both a global icon and a multi-million-dollar enterprise. But even with the new era of major label support and receptive audiences anxiously waiting to become fiends, the road to success would not be so easy for the reanimated Misfits. As stories like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein have shown, resurrecting the dead usually doesn't go over so smoothly, and it often leads to abominations. The newly fashioned Jerry Only-led Misfits immediately embarked on a journey that would bring the band and its logo to the shelves of not only record shops, but major shopping malls and even cable TV. But at the same time, the experiment would be ripe with constant infighting, and it would end with Jerry Only essentially being left on his own. But still, the reanimated Misfits with Graves were successful for a short period, and they did leave behind some memorable tracks. Now, admittedly, many, especially younger fans, in the late 90s and early 2000s were first introduced to the Misfits through this recreated version of the band and their two albums with Michale Graves, American Psycho and Famous Monsters. But with the band's most recognizable member and founder Glenn Danzig having nothing to do with these albums, the question remains, was the 5-year period of the Misfits with Michale Graves an abomination that should have never happened? Or was it a good gateway to the Misfits' deeper catalog, especially for people who otherwise missed out on Glenn Danzig's underground handling of the band's legacy in the late 1980s. Hi everyone, I'm Joe Meyer and this is Heavy Academia, a place meant to foster discussions about heavy music. Now, I was just a kid when I first heard the Misfits in the late 90s, and my first two CDs were American Psycho and Legacy of Brutality. And I have to admit that to my young ears, American Psycho just sounded way better. Even though I would come to feel the exact opposite not very long afterwards, it does put things into perspective, which is why I want to focus on the Graves era Misfits in this video, to explore what its legacy is and to hear what you all think. Did it help other kids get into the Misfits' deeper catalog of music, especially its original version with Glenn Danzig, or was it an imposter of sorts that just should have never happened? Now, Jerry Only and Doyle wasted no time in resurrecting the Misfits in 1995. With their failed sci-fi Christian power metal band Christ the Conqueror now in the rearview mirror, they recruited drummer Dr. Chud and began searching for a new singer. According to Jerry and Doyle, the first person that they had in mind was none other than Glenn Danzig himself. However, when they went to a hotel Glenn was staying at to offer him the job, Jerry said in an interview that, "We went to his door and knocked, and 15 minutes later security came and walked us out of the hotel. So we took that as a no." Either way, in a rather surprising turn for a band that had made it clear they wanted to be as big and famous as possible, they recruited 19-year-old Michael Emanuel, aka Michale Graves, after he tried out in an open audition and impressed the members. The new Misfits, now a quartet made up of Jerry Only, Doyle, Dr. Chud, and Michale Graves, hit the scene to the shock of pretty much everyone familiar with the Misfits and Danzig, playing their first surprise show on Halloween of 1995. Even though Jerry was the only original member, and Doyle the only other Misfits veteran, the timing was perfect for this reanimated corpse of a band to succeed, both triumphantly and legally carrying the banner of the now legendary Crimson Ghost across a Clinton-era pop culture landscape that had warmed up to all things paranormal. But even more importantly, at the exact same time, American punk reached a new level of mainstream prominence, catapulted by the success of bands like Green Day and The Offspring. And so, the timing was just right for the newly fashioned version of the Misfits. The new marketability of the Misfits impressed the mainstream corporate rock world so much that Geffen Records decided to sign Jerry, Doyle, and the new version of the Misfits to a multi-record deal in 1996, effectively placing the band that, just a few years prior, was little more than a Glenn Danzig legacy project on the same label label as bands like Aerosmith, Beck, Counting Crows, and Weezer. With Michale Graves on the microphone, the band released American Psycho in 1997 and Famous Monsters 2 years later, both of which fully committed to the B-horror and sci-fi movie aesthetic, made famous during the band's original lineup, to the point that it at times became cheesy and even divided fans, with many still refusing to accept a version of the Misfits that didn't include Glenn Danzig. But still, this didn't stop the albums from selling well and receiving mixed to even positive reviews, with American Psycho reaching number 117 on the Billboard 200, and Famous Monsters peaking at 138, which is, well, a number almost too ironic not to have its legitimacy questioned. Even though the horror and sci-fi movie lyrics of the two albums with Michale Graves can come off as overdone and gimmicky at times, they did produce some more memorable sing-alongs like Dig Up Her Bones and Helena, while Jerry admitted that the band wanted to make the songs more accessible and even family-friendly, claiming that we want to be able to sell our toys to kids and for kids to be able to buy our record.
If you're bound in your gown, draped and displayed, would you still love me?
The band's popularity exploded at the turn of the century, and even landed them a spot in World Championship Wrestling in 1999. Alongside horror-themed wrestler Vampiro, the Misfits joined the WCW for a few months in the organization's bid to outcompete the WWF for cable time, bringing Jerry Only and the Misfits to thousands of home televisions across the USA. The band's wrestling venture even threatened to interfere with the Misfits' own touring duties, with other band members much less enthused about it than Jerry, especially Michale Graves, who told an interviewer that he wasn't too excited about wrestling or getting punched in the face by Buff Bagwell. And shortly after recreating the Misfits, Jerry would make it clear to all the other members that it was indeed his band, and no one suffered for it more than the young Michale Graves, who was little more than a kid by the time he joined the band. Even with his controversial politics in later years and his unenviable job as attempted Glenn Danzig replacement, it's kinda hard not to feel sorry for the young singer during his short time as Misfits frontman. Although Jerry and Glenn had a tenuous relationship, it was clear throughout the Misfits revival period that Jerry would have loved nothing more than to have Glenn Danzig back on vocals, which created a standard that Michale Graves, or any other singer for that matter, had no hope of living up to. Graves would claim that throughout his time with the Misfits, Jerry constantly criticized his vocal performances, even accusing him of sounding too bluesy, while Jerry's adamance on horror-themed songs gave Graves little artistic freedom or input into the songwriting. To add insult to injury, Graves claims that Jerry began increasingly putting classic Misfits songs into their live sets, which seemed contrary to what Graves had signed up for, leading him to question his own role and the level of respect he was receiving in the band. Tensions took their toll early on, and in 1998, almost exactly 1 year from the release of American Psycho, Jerry and the band booked a South American tour without consulting Graves first, who had made his own plans that overlapped with the tour dates. Furious he wasn't given more notice for the tour, the young singer told Jerry he intended to take his vacation anyway. The band responded by going on tour in South America without him, and recruited their friend Mike Hideous on vocals, who actually did a good job filling in the role on such short notice, and he really fit the profile of the Misfits' ghouly image. But despite receiving positive feedback, Hideous himself was dropped from the band shortly after the tour, only to be replaced once again by the patiently waiting Michale Graves. But even though Graves stayed in the band long enough the second time around to record Famous Monsters, the drama would continue. In September of 2000, the Misfits embarked on a headlining tour of Canada. But at the border, Graves was denied entry due to outstanding visa issues, which stemmed from a previous misdemeanor assault charge. In response to Graves' denial of entry into Canada, the band held a vote and decided to, once again, continue on without him. And once again, they replaced him, but this time with the frontman of melodic hardcore band Ignite, Zoli Teglas, which, as great of a singer as he is, was kind of a strange fit given his Orange County hardcore background. Jerry himself would also take up vocal duties on dates that Zoli was unavailable. In October of the year 2000, the Misfits followed up the Canada tour by touring throughout the US, and Graves once again returned on vocals. However, by now he seemed to have reached his breaking point. At their October 25th show at the House of Blues in Lake Buena Vista, Graves quit the band mid-set. In response, Doyle stormed off stage, followed by Graves and then Dr. Chud, leaving Jerry Only alone to awkwardly finish the set by himself. This time kicked out of the band for good, Graves was escorted out of the House of Blues by security, and Dr. Chud, in an apparent show of solidarity, left too. Jerry would go on to take up vocals as he and Doyle continued on with the rest of the tour. It was evident right then and there, at least from a musical standpoint, that the reformed Misfits, much like Frankenstein's monster, were an utter disaster. Only's bullying of Graves and his undying desire to control the band and to reunite with Glenn Danzig doomed the viability of the reanimated corpse that had become the Misfits. Dave Brockie of Gwar, who spent time on the road with the Misfits, would claim that Graves was basically beaten out of the band. Jerry wouldn't let Mike be the star. Jerry wanted to be the star and he couldn't stand it. He felt Mike was just some young, dumb kid. I mean, Mike could be a prima donna, but he was supposed to be. He's the fucking singer. After recording and releasing 2 successful albums, the Graves-era Misfits were dead after only 5 years. After his time with the Misfits, Michael Graves would go on to form his own band called Graves, followed by a solo project that often covered Graves-era Misfit songs. After leaving the Misfits, he would also go on to co-found the website Conservative Punk in 2004. Now, this website was supposed to provide a platform for fans of punk music that had felt excluded by what they perceived as punk rock's increasingly Democratic Party leanings, which was spearheaded by NoFX frontman Fat Mike's liberal-leaning project called Punk Voter, and the 2004 Rock Against Bush tour. Graves' contributions to conservative punk were largely ridiculed in an episode of The Daily Show. But despite the failure of the Graves-era Misfits and the steady decline of punk rock in the United States in the 2000s, marketing of the Misfits brand continued on, unfazed by the drama in the band's lineup. In fact, Misfits merchandising reached new heights around the same time, and as Misfits chronicler James Green Jr. puts it, the Crimson Ghost logo was being plastered on everything, from t-shirts to wallets to shoelaces and lunchboxes. Toy shelves soon found themselves invaded by fully articulated 12-inch Misfits action figures packaged in cardboard coffins with tiny guitar accessories. In the 2000s, Misfits merchandising also received a huge boost by the horror punk aesthetic of bands heading the post-hardcore trend that often adopted a Misfits-esque look. And this kept the relevance of the band's image alive beyond the relevance of their music, as the Graves era faded into history and remains a polarizing period in the story of the Misfits up to the present day. However, Jerry Only and the Misfits did continue playing without Michael Graves, and eventually even without Doyle, who left in 2001 to pursue a solo career, and he would eventually go on to play classic Misfits songs on stage with Glenn Danzig. After the end of the Michael Graves experiment, Jerry Only took up vocal duties himself for the next 15 years, until he finally reunited with Glenn Danzig as part of the original Misfits. But that's enough from me, and I'd like to hear what you all think about the Misfits with Michael Graves. Does the era hold up in the Misfits' broader catalog of music? Or did it serve as a sort of gateway for you into the original Misfits with Glenn Danzig? Or is it something that just should have never happened? And does it even deserve to be considered part of the Misfits' longer history? Let us know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time on Heavy Academia.